The redistricting process in this cycle is not yet done, and we've been waiting to find out about a couple of very consequential states. Will the proposed maps be allowed through? Now, there have been challenges against some in a number of states. The most consequential ones, generally agreed at this point, Florida, where Ron DeSantis was just given the unilateral power to determine whatever the districts should be. We wonder what's gonna happen with that one. But the big one that actually could have benefited the Democrats was in New York, and that has now been knocked down. New York's highest court just 2 days ago rejected the state's new congressional district maps, which had been widely seen as favoring Democrats. That's what they did, they favored the Democrats. Their new maps would have given Democrats a strong majority of registered voters in 22 of the state's 26 congressional districts. Republicans now at this point hold 8 of what are 27. So they are gonna lose one because of population shifts. That's a natural part of this process. And so they have a 19-8 advantage. They could have potentially gained a few more seats, getting up to 85% of the congressional seats, which by the way, in a state that Joe Biden won with about 61%. So they should have the majority. They should have more than just one advantage, but that would have been a disproportionate advantage. And that is what you get when you allow politicians to determine their own maps, to do gerrymandering. I don't want it to exist. I want the process to be blocked for both Democrats and Republicans. The way that it's shaking out though, is that while maps on both sides have been blocked, the most consequential ones that will have the strongest individual effect on who has control of the House after the elections of this fall, well, right now, again, it seems to be shifted in the favor of the Republicans, because so far Florida's has not been canceled, but New York's has been, and that by itself might be enough to give the Republicans control. Brett.
The idea, it just sucks when, like, if your side plays by decent rules, the other side benefits because they don't. That's a lot of politics. That's all about raw, naked power, and I understand it. I think the solution to all of this is, especially if the fundamental theme of your country is freedom and democracy, that you should have some, at least semblance of that in your overall system of representation. Now, I would say that they're like, well, our system is a Republican, is a Democratic republic. And so there's systems that might skew it a little bit, but the founders didn't want that. By their own ways that they justify the 3/5 compromise, the founders didn't want that. Like the founders wanted to set up a system with 3 branches of government and checks and balances, so that there would be some buffer between the naked power grabs of gerrymanderers and that actually going into effect. And they would use the courts as the dispassionate arbiters of what's fair to draw in terms of lines of representation.
Yeah,
that falls apart when the creep of corruption makes its way to all 3 parts of government. That's exactly what's happened in the states that have greenlit this kind of stuff, whether they're red or blue. And the only solution is if we have an enshrined in law policy of dispassionately drawing representational maps so that they're not that far away from the breakdown of how people vote in those elections.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's all possible. And by the way, in some cases, there have been reforms in some states that have given it over to nonpartisan organizations. In other states, there have been attempts via legislation, constitutional amendments to move the state away from this sort of gerrymandering. But that doesn't mean that in practice, they do end up doing that. I wanna jump ahead, by the way, to Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report. He had a tweet where he said, Florida, New York, and Ohio all have extremely similar anti-gerrymandering language enshrined in state constitutions that have been passed by voters. But only New York is on track to actually enforce the reforms. And that's one of the things that's gonna produce such a biased result from this. So they all have things that are supposed to stop them from doing the gerrymandering, but is that actually how it's playing out? Well, the legislature literally, like, it would be bad enough if just the Republican state legislature got to determine it. That already would likely produce a biased map. But they decided to just hand it over to Ron DeSantis, one of the most like nakedly partisan politicians in the country. How does that fit in with their constitution? It doesn't matter. If the state Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court are okay with it, it doesn't matter what's in the Constitution. And in the case of New York, by the way, the court has struck it down. Along the way, though, the Democrats, it's a super complicated back and forth, but they took multiple different actions to try to gain like individual control of this process. This map was not made in the way that it was supposed to. But in this case, the court actually stopped it in part because of that. So when you have some Supreme Courts that are, I think, fairly adjudicating the constitutions, and then you have others that are looking at it in purely political terms, the exact same way that the politicians generating the maps are, well, then again, like it doesn't matter what the people said. It doesn't matter what constitutional amendments they pass. You're gonna produce the same sort of biased results as you did previously. And so at this point, look, we already had a lot of reasons to believe that the Republicans were gonna do very well in the fall. If they're getting mostly what they want in these maps, and some have been struck down, but they're not the most consequential ones, then Brett, is looking like it is gonna be really rough.
Yeah, there's a net pickup just by redrawing the lines for Republicans. And there's no justification for that in the overall shift in how people are gonna vote. Like that sucks. Everyone, for those of you who are kind of unfamiliar with what gerrymandering is, basically they can draw lines to make it so that, let's say that 55% of the people in a state are gonna vote for Democrats and 45% of the people in a state are gonna vote for Republicans. They can draw the line so that when it's all said and done in the state house, they like carve people up so that it's like 85% of that seats are held by Republicans just because of who had the position when they were drawing the lines.
Yeah,
that's what happened. That's why 2020, and they do it every 10 years, is when they do the census. It's important that you be in charge of interpreting the census, sadly, and running the census. And it's also important that, and that creep is the one word you should associate with it, because this doesn't happen immediately. Over time, corruption creeps. They get a little control over this office, they get more control over that office, and suddenly they're drawing every line insanely so that it favors them.
100%. Yeah, that's what we're seeing. We're gonna see what ends up happening. The primaries might well be delayed for New York. They'll come out with some map, but they're not gonna come out with that map. It's not gonna be as biased. Maybe we should just get rid of the whole thing. Stop letting these politicians choose their own districts.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.